for coming. It'd be my pleasure to introduce Dr. Paul Connett, coming to spend some time with us this evening to talk about his new book, The Case Against Fluoride. And then I just want to go over this real quick, just to give you a quick summary of what's going on here this evening. Although most countries have rejected the practice, many cities and towns across the United States continue to fluoridate their water supply, and the Center for Disease Control and the American Dental Association continue to endorse it. The Case Against Fluoride, Paul takes a new look at the science behind water fluoridation and argues that just because dental and medical establishments endorse a public health measure doesn't mean it's safe. The book brings new research to light, including links between fluoride and harm to the brain and bones. It argues that the evidence that fluoridation reduces tooth decay is surprisingly weak. Dr. Paul Connett is a graduate of Cambridge University and holds a PhD in chemistry from Dartmouth College. From 1983 until his retirement in May 2006, he taught chemistry at St. Lawrence University, where he specialized in environmental chemistry and toxicology. Over the past 26 years, his research on waste management has taken him to 49 states in the U.S., 55 other countries, where he has given over 2,000 pro bono public presentations. Paul is one of the founders of the Fluoride Action Network, FAN, and has given invited presentations on the dangers of fluoridation to legislative and research bodies in Australia, Canada, Germany, Ireland, Israel, Japan, New Zealand, the UK, and the United States. That latter has included presentations to both the Environmental Protection Agency and the National Research Council. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Connett.
Thank you very much, all of you, for coming, and thank you, John and Kelly, for organizing this meeting, and thank you in advance to Sam Stradling, my former chairman at the St. Lawrence University Chemistry Department, who I will be staying with tonight. It's always a delight to come to Hamilton for that reason. That, and of course, beating Colgate at hockey is another good. Anyway, I've been involved with this for 15 years. I didn't want the issue. I'd refused. 3 people had asked me to get involved. Somebody from Spokane, Washington, somebody in Ohio, another person in Ontario, and each time I cried that I was too busy. I was teaching chemistry at St. Lawrence, and in my spare time, every weekend, every holiday practically, talking about waste somewhere in the world. So I didn't want a third issue, especially this one, which stigmatizes opponents as being Looney Tunes, or the wacko, Dr. Strangelove, and so on. Anyway, I started to read up on the issue, and I was shocked and embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I'd gone along with the crowd, that people opposed to fluoridation were a little strange. Okay, I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes and give you plenty of time for asking me, hopefully, a lot of questions. So I'm going to be talking about the fact that it's a poor medical practice, that it's unethical, that the evidence that it actually works is extremely weak, and there is no adequate margin of safety from known health effects of fluoride. And let me make that very clear from the start. The argument is not about whether fluoride damages health. Fluoride does damage health. Millions of people in India and China, parts of Africa and Mexico, have had their lives ruined by fluoride. They've been crippled by fluoride. So that's not an argument. The argument is there an adequate margin of safety between the levels which we know cause harm in China, India, and so on, and the levels that we're going to get in drinking fluoridated water. So it's a poor medical practice. This is the only time since 1945, and the only time, except for a short experiment with iodine, of using the public water supply to deliver medicine. We obviously add a lot of chemicals to water, but all those chemicals are to make the water palatable and safe to drink. Fluoridation is the only time that we've actually used the public water supply to deliver medicine to the public. And that's a very bad idea, because you can control the concentration at the public waterworks, but you can't control the dose, because the dose depends on how much water you drink. And some people drink a lot of water. I was just in Western Australia, where miners there drink between 10 and 12 litres of water a day. So not being able to control the dose is a fatal aspect of this problem, of this practice. You ask any pharmacist if there's any drug in his store, her store, that he can say to a patient, take as much as you want, take any amount. You can't do that. You've got to have a dose, a regulated dose. The third thing is that you can't control who gets it. Everybody gets it. If you put it in the water supply, everybody's going to get it, from babies through to very old people, people that are sick, people that have poor nutrition, people that have poor kidney function. Everybody is going to get it. And ask any pharmacist whether there's any drug that you can give to everybody. No. Next, there's no individual oversight by a doctor. And it's even worse than that, because doctors are not trained at medical school to recognize the symptoms for people that are very sensitive to fluoride. Now that's controversial. The promoters will deny that anybody is sensitive to fluoride, its toxic effects. But quite frankly, it's what you would expect. You would expect for any toxic substance to be a normal distribution of response, a bell-shaped curve, where you'd expect some people at one end of the curve, a small percentage, to be very resistant to any toxic substance, and the other people at the other end of the curve to be very, very sensitive. So when people complain of symptoms, neurological, dermatological, gastrointestinal, it's what you would expect, that maybe 1 or 2% will have these effects. And when they claim that these effects disappear when the source is removed, and then they come back when the source is represented, is an indication that something is wrong here. But no doctors are trained to recognize these symptoms. No health agency is monitoring for side effects. Even though fluoride has now become the most prescribed medication in US history, going to over 180 million Americans every day in their drinking water, the Food and Drug Administration has never regulated fluoride for ingestion, either as a tablet form, prescription drug, or in the water. Never. And as a result, they've never tracked the side effects, which they would normally do for drugs. You have doctors and patients sending in any description of side effects they're experiencing. That's not been done. Nor have they had randomized clinical trials to demonstrate effectiveness. It's not a nutrient. Sometimes promoters say that fluoride is a nutrient. Well, it isn't. To demonstrate that something is a nutrient, you have to starve the animal of this substance from its diet. And if it's a nutrient, then it develops a disease. If we're starved of vitamin C, we get scurvy. And that's how these vitamins were discovered. If you didn't have them in your diet, you developed disease. No one has ever demonstrated a disease due to lack of fluoride. Tooth decay is not caused by a lack of fluoride. You can have perfectly good teeth without fluoride in your diet. Next, fluoride is an extremely toxic substance. And it's very interesting when you read the history to find that the first opponents of fluoridation in the United States were biochemists. Biochemists who had used fluoride to inhibit enzymes in their experiments. And we've since found it interferes with other things as well, including G proteins. We describe all that in the book. And one of those biochemists was none other than James Sumner at Cornell University, who won the Nobel Prize for enzyme chemistry. And these guys were shocked that we would deliberately expose the body to this very, very toxic substance. The level used in fluoridation is not small. They like to make fun of this and say, well, 1 part per million. 1 part per million is 1 cent in $10,000. It's 1 inch in 16 miles. But meaning to communicate the notion that this is extremely small. But before you can deduce that 1 part per million is small, when you're talking about a toxic substance, you need to know something about the substance. For example, 1 part per million is 100 times the safe drinking water standard for arsenic. So it ain't small for arsenic. As if you were talking about dioxin, it's 1,000,000 times too much. Now, as far as the fluoride is concerned, a very good baseline to compare it with is the level in mother's milk, which can range as low as 0.004 parts per million. So in fact, it's 1 part per million is 250 times the level in mother's milk, which is one of the facts that shocked me when I first started reading the literature. I mentioned the Food and Drug Administration has never regulated fluoride for ingestion. Its official classification is that fluoride is an unapproved drug. And again, I've said it's never been subjected to randomized clinical trials for effectiveness. There has been no randomized double-blind study to demonstrate the effectiveness of fluoridation after 60 years of this practice. However, the FDA does regulate fluoridated toothpaste, and I urge you when you go home tonight to look at your fluoridated toothpaste in your cupboard and look at the back, and you'll see drug facts. Then you'll see do not swallow, and then you'll see use a pea-sized amount. And then the warning, which is required by the FDA since 1997, oh, that's a pea-sized amount. The warning from the FDA is keep out of the reach of children under 6 years of age. If more than used for brushing is accidentally swallowed, get medical help or contact a poison control center right away. So that's required on the back of a tube of toothpaste. Now, you're probably wondering what a pea-sized amount of toothpaste at 1,000 million, how much fluoride is that? The answer is it's about 1/4 milligram. Now remember, 1 part per million is 1 milligram per liter. So 1/4 milligram is in a 1 milligram per liter. Therefore 1/4 milligram is in a 1/4 liter. Right? Just a simple ratio. You can see I was a chemist. Okay. So this 0.25 milligrams is equivalent to 250 milliliters. That's 1/4 liter of water at 1 part per million. Now imagine if you were Monty Python. I was at college with John Cleese, by the way, so I quite often refer to Monty Python. I played soccer with him. He wasn't very good. But imagine what then you would do if the FDA actually regulated fluoridated water, what the notice would be in your kitchen. It would say above the tap, do not swallow, keep out of the reach of kids under 6 years of age, and if you drink more than 1 glass of water, contact the poison control center. There's something peculiar about this picture, right?
Yes.
Fluoridation is not ethical. This has been one of the strongest arguments which has never really been taken away. No government has the right to force medication on its people to fight a non-contagious, non-life-threatening disease. I put those two things at the end because I think you can envisage a situation where there's an outbreak of some dreadful disease that is killing people. And then you could see the government stepping in and saying, we've got to vaccinate everybody, we've got to inoculate everybody against this. And sorry, we can't take your individual resistance to this because if we don't vaccinate you or don't inoculate you, you're going to spread the disease to other people. I can see that. But this is not the case with tooth decay. That we don't have an outbreak of kissing disease in this country. You can spread the bacteria that cause tooth decay by kissing a baby and licking the teeth, that kind of thing. But it's not contagious in a social sense. It deprives individuals of their right to informed consent to medication, which is pretty serious. If you go to the American Medical Association's homepage, webpage, ama.org, they have a very clear definition of what informed consent to medication, what a doctor has to do with the patient. The doctor is required to tell you what the drug is for, and he's required to tell you what the side effects are. And then having told you that, you're supposed to make up your mind. Now this is theoretical, of course, because most of us trust our doctor, and the doctor says, take this, we usually do. But you still have to, he has to do, or she has to go through the motions here. And if they don't, they can be in serious trouble. What he cannot do is to say, drink this. This is good for you, drink it. He said, no, I don't want to drink it. Drink it. If he was to do that, he'd lose his license. And what then this amounts to is a government is doing to everyone what a doctor can do to no one. So in Hamilton right now, you're doing to everyone what none of your doctors will be allowed to do in Hamilton to any individual citizen. The evidence of benefit is very weak. This came as a shock to me because I just assumed that there might be some issues with the health, but I assumed that it worked. Most people assume that it's worked. They're told that it works. We're told that it's wonderful. Well, if you compare countries, first of all, most countries don't fluoridate their water. Most of Europe, 98% of Europe does not fluoridate its water. Japan, India, China, the vast proportion of the world's population does not drink fluoridated water. At the most, 400 million people. Most of them live in North America. Only 8 countries in the world have more than 50% of their populations drinking fluoridated water. But if you look at, this is data compiled by the World Health Organization. They track decayed, missing and filled teeth. That's a way of measuring tooth decay in 12-year-olds in all the countries, all the industrialized countries in the world. And you see that the tooth decay in 12-year-olds has been coming down sharply from the 60s to the present. And the tooth decay right now, if you compare the different countries, it's a wash. And in fact, on this graph here, you've got about 14 countries which are not fluoridated and 4 countries which are fluoridated. It is impossible to tell the difference between these countries. So there's no difference, essentially, in tooth decay between 12-year-olds, whether they've grown up in a fluoridated country or a non-fluoridated country. And the question is why? Why is this coming down? This probably reflects 2 things. One, increased standard of living, which goes hand in hand with diet. There's a very strong relationship between tooth decay and poverty levels. Very strong relationship. And possibly also the availability of topical treatments, the availability of fluoridated toothpaste, which is universally available. Now, if we compare US states, here we've put the states, the US states, in order of the percentage of the population drinking fluoridated water. We're down here, it's Hawaii, with practically no, apart from the army military camps, no fluoridation in Hawaii. Over here, the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., 100% fluoridated, and in between, different percentages between, say, about 10% and 90%. Now, on here, I have plotted an answer to 50 different questionnaires that were given to parents in 50 states. And one of those questions was, and that's what's plotted here, is does your child have very good or excellent teeth? And that is the answer that they got from the 50 states. And you can see it's rather noisy, but it's flat, and you don't see any relationship between this curve. And that's for families of low income. If you look at the responses for families of high income, you'll see there's far less noise. It's about 80% are saying that their children's teeth are very good or excellent. And what you also notice is what I said before, there's a very strong relationship between income levels and tooth decay, but you cannot find a relationship between the answers to this questionnaire and the percentage of that state that's drinking fluoridated water. Now, if you look at US communities, there was a huge survey done in 86-87. This cost the US taxpayer nearly $4 million. They looked at tooth decay in 39,000 children in 84 communities. And this is the average tooth decay for children from the ages of 5 to 17 who lived all their lives in a non-fluoridated community, and the same for children who lived all their lives in a fluoridated community. And so the difference, the grand difference, is 0.6 of a tooth surface out of 5 tooth surfaces to a tooth. There's actually the top 6, the bottom 6 cutting teeth only have 4 surfaces. All the rest have 5 surfaces. So we're talking about one filling, 1 tooth surface out of 128 tooth surfaces in a child's mouth, 0.6. And studies in Australia have found even less. This is 2 states in Western Australia and Queensland, between 0.12 and 0.3 of a permanent tooth surface. And in Armfield and Spencer, looking at 10,000 children in South Australia, found no significant difference in tooth decay in the permanent teeth of children, whether they lived all their lives in a fluoridated community or a non-fluoridated community, or drinking tank water or bottled water. So the evidence is not very strong, especially for these large surveys. Now the explanation for this was conceded by the Center for Disease Control, which is one of the big promoters of fluoridation in the United States. When I say the Center for Disease Control, it's the oral health division of the Center for Disease Control, which is about 30 people, all dentally trained. There's very few toxicologists or medical specialists amongst them. And basically, they promote fluoridation. And even though their words on this subject are very influential, the CDC in 1999 said that fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century, and that message has gone around the world. It's quoted somewhere nearly every day. But they also conceded what dental researchers have been finding for the previous 10 years or so, that the major benefits, the predominant benefit of fluoride is topical. It works on the outside of the tooth, not from inside the body. And they said, whoops, we were wrong. For 50 years, we thought that the baby had to get fluoride before its teeth had erupted. And that's why pediatricians gave tablets to pregnant women and drops to babies before their teeth had erupted. The idea being to build up the fluoride in the enamel so that when the teeth finally emerged through the gums, the enamel would be more resistant to the acid attack caused by bacteria breaking down sugar. They said, whoops, we were wrong. Not enough enamel is incorporated by that mechanism before the teeth have erupted to protect the teeth. And therefore, they said the predominant benefit is topical. Well, when you think about it, once they'd admitted it was topical, that was the time to stop fluoridation. Because you can solve both the health problem and the ethical problem in one swoop. Because if you recognize it's topical, we've got fluoridated toothpaste, universally available in every country. It's hard to avoid it in the United States. If you brush it on your teeth and spit it out, that avoids exposing every tissue in the body to this toxic substance, number one. Not completely, some will go through the gum. And secondly, you're not exposing people that don't want it. So you're solving the ethical problem as well. So it's really sad. In fact, it's tragic that when the major promoter of fluoridation actually admitted this, that it was a signal to end fluoridation. And here's actually two quotes from the CDC. Its actions primarily are topical for both adults and children. That was 99. And fluoride's predominant effect is post-eruptive and topical from 2001. So that brings me to part 4. I argue that there's no adequate margin of safety to protect everyone from known harmful effects of fluoride. This book another point, another time when fluoridation should have ended was with the publication of this National Research Council report called Fluoride in Drinking Water, a scientific review of EPA's drinking water standards. It's 507 pages, 1,100 references. I actually gave testimony. I was the only anti-fluoridation scientist to give personal testimony before this body, and I'm happy to say that much of what I said is incorporated, not that they necessarily agree with me, but they incorporated the references and so on. Anyway, they thought this would take them a year. It took them 3.5 years. It is the most comprehensive analysis of fluoride's toxicology that's ever been done. This is, right now, it's the textbook of toxicology of fluoride. Again, I'm sad to say it's been largely ignored by those countries that continue to promote fluoridation, which is sad. But our book, in a way, is son of. I mean, we try to make a lot of the science here understandable to the ordinary person. So we've written a book, which is, when I say we, there's 3 scientists, a biologist, a physicist, and a chemist. Also, the physicist has an MD as well. We try to write a book that was easy to read. Some passages, I think some of it is a little difficult, but most of it is fairly readable. But for those who are scientifically trained or medically trained, there's 80 pages of references here to back up everything we say. So every fact, every argument is backed up with references. But, as I say, It's trying to make a lot of this material more accessible to the public. If you think this is difficult to read, try this one. So there it is. Oh, by the way, their conclusion was that the so-called safe drinking water standard of 4 parts per million is not safe and it needs to be lowered. And even after now, it's nearly 5 years, and the EPA has yet to do that. It's yet to lower the safe drinking water standard. Right now, we function between 2 levels. 1 part per million is supposed to be good for teeth. 4 parts per million is supposed to be unsafe. So right now, we're working between 1 and 4 parts per million. When they lower this standard, then the margin is going to be even smaller that we're operating between. But in the book, again, can I stress here, we're talking about fluoride now, not necessarily fluoridation. But fluoride causes dental fluorosis, causes brain damage, lowers thyroid function, accumulates in the human pineal gland, causes bone damage, maybe osteosarcoma. We may actually be killing a few young boys with this practice, a few, not many, but the evidence is mixed. And finally, some people are very sensitive to low levels. So all of this is documented in that book. And I'm going to focus on just a couple of things. Dental fluorosis, over which there's no argument, but it needs some clarification. The early promoters thought that at 1 part per million fluoride, they could limit dental fluorosis, which is a discoloration of the enamel in its mildest form. It's little white opaque patches on the cusp of the teeth. That's the very mildest. And then as it gets more serious, it covers more of the tooth surface. But they thought that at 1 part per million, they would lower tooth decay, but only have about 10% of the kids in its very mild form. And we'll see where we are today. Oh, but by the way, I'm going to show you pictures of this in a moment. That same survey I've already mentioned, the 39,000 children in 84 communities, they found that 30% of kids in the fluoridated communities had this condition. Nearly 30%, so out by a factor of 3. They wanted 10%. And then when you look at the different, this is very mild, this is moderate, this is severe, they expected 10% very mild. They got double that, and you notice that they were also now, because we have more sources of fluoride, even people in non-fluoridated areas in the United States have dental fluorosis. And 5.8% in the mild, 1.3% in the moderate. Now let's have a look at what that looks like. This is very mild, which ranges, this is one end of the range. It ranges from little opaque patches on the cusp of the teeth up to 25% of the tooth surface would be very mild. Mild is up to 50% of the tooth surface impacted, and moderate is 100% of the tooth surface impacted, and with indentations and discoloration. And those white patches tend to get discolored with time. So this is moderate dental fluorosis. Some of you probably saw it in the newspapers or saw it on television that the Department of Health and Human Services said, whoops, our kids are being overexposed to fluoride, we're going to lower the recommended level. And the reason for that was as follows. I showed you the earlier figures. The difference between these figures and what I showed you before is this is for all American children now. This is an average for all American children, which includes children in fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. So these were the 1986-87 figures, and you can see how they jumped in the 2004 figures, from 17.2% very mild to 28.5, 4.1% mild up to 8.6, and moderate and severe now up to 3.6%. Altogether, 41% of children 12 to 15 have dental fluorosis. And that's all American children. So probably we have about 50% in fluoridated communities. And again, that's what sponsored the recommendation. Instead of having the range of 0.7 to 1.2 parts per million, they're saying no range, we're going to have it at 0.7. That's the recommendation. Now, for me and other opponents of the fluoridation, the key question is, when the fluoride is damaging the growing tooth cells, causing this disruption of the enamel, what's it doing to their other tissues? And we can see the dental fluorosis, they can't deny that. But what about, what's it doing to the bones? What's it doing to their brains? And I am particularly concerned about the brain. This is what they said in here, National Research Council. It is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with functions of the brain. And there have been 100 animal studies, over 100 animal studies, but what I'm particularly concerned about, we now have 24 published studies, human studies, which indicate association between fairly modest exposure to fluoride and lowered IQ in children. And all of them are listed in our book, the studies, except for 2 that have been published since, and on our webpage. Right, the one that particularly interests me is this study by Zhang, which was, the methodology was pretty good, and I had the opportunity to go to China and visit these 2 villages. One village with less than 0.7 parts per million fluoride in their water, and the other village 2.5 to 4.5. And the remarkable thing about these villages is that everything seemed to be the same. I mean, this whole area was fairly stable. I mean, people don't move around, haven't moved around for hundreds of years. All the occupations were the same. They were all farmers, rural farmers. They were all, the housing was the same. The diet was the same. Their lifestyle was the same. Their schooling was the same. So certainly from what you see, there didn't seem to be much difference. And also, they did control for lead exposure and iodine intake, which would be, they also interfere with mental development. So it was important that they controlled for that. And they found a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range. In fact, they found the whole curve, IQ curve, shifted so that there were fewer brilliant geniuses, if you like, very bright children in the high fluoride village, and more mentally handicapped. The whole curve was shifted over. And Zhang estimated that this effect would occur at 1.9 parts per million. And that brings us to this incredibly important discussion of margin of safety. And these are 3 words that you'll never hear come out of the mouth of a promoter of fluoridation. They cannot deal with margin of safety for reasons which I think you'll find obvious in a moment. So we've got a situation then where we've found lowering of IQ, and the lowest observable adverse effect level is 1.9 parts per million. And it's a small population. Now, imagine you are a regulator, and you have to determine from this what is a safe level to protect the whole population. This is absolutely standard. That's what I taught students at St. Lawrence. It's like toxicology 101. What do you do when you've got evidence of harm and now you've got to protect the whole population? And normally what you do is you find that lowest dose which causes harm and divide by 10. It's a safety factor. It's called intraspecies variation. You assume that you've got a 10-fold range of response to any toxic substance in the human population. And here you've only got about 300 Chinese kids. Obviously the genetics is uniform, etc., etc., etc. You've got a very limited slice of the population as far as the American is concerned. So now your job is to protect every American kid from this effect of lowering IQ. So I'm going to make the thing a little simple. I'm going to I say normally a safety factor of 10. It's called intraspecies variation. It's absolutely standard. I'm going to assume that these kids drank 1 liter of water a day. So I'm dealing with a dose and not a concentration, okay? I want to deal with the dose. So if they drank 1 liter of water a day at 1.9 parts per million, that's 1.9 milligrams per liter, they're getting 1.9 milligrams per day. Divide that by 10, and therefore to protect all American children, this is going to make sure that no American child drinking fluoridated water is going to have their IQ lowered. And it's 0.19 milligrams per day. That's less than a glass of water. In other words, you can't do it. So your only hope now, if you're a promoter of fluoridation, you've got to junk this study. You've got to say that this study was so poorly done that we can't take it seriously. We can't do this calculation. And if you can't do that, then fluoridation should end. I mean, I say it later, I'll say it again. What parent in their right mind would put their children's brains second to their teeth? And with not much tooth decay at that. So, I want to just tell you something else. This Zhang also submitted an article recently to the Environmental Health Perspectives, which is the journal of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. That's part of the Department of Health and Human Services. They accepted it. It's a premier journal. They accepted his article. Sadly, and they printed it online before it went to paper publication. And then sadly it was withdrawn. And it was withdrawn because Zhang had published some of the material before, which is a violation of the journal's requirements. You mustn't have published any of the study before. There was new stuff in it, but he'd published some of it before. But the important thing for us is that it went through peer review of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. They accepted the methodology. It wasn't rejected on methodology. And so it's going to be very difficult for them to chuck out this study. Also, and this came out just a couple of weeks ago, there's been another study from China, which is going to be published in the Journal of Hazardous Materials, in which they had a much smaller range. The average level of fluoride in the water of their subjects was 1.3, and it ranged from 0.3 to 3 parts per million. Now this overlaps. The doses here overlap. You don't even need a margin of safety calculation that we've already got. We're at the same doses that we have. They concluded, overall, our study suggested that low levels of fluoride exposure in drinking water had negative effects on children's intelligence. The results also confirmed the dose-response relationship between urine fluoride concentrations and IQ scores. And this is important because they took it one step beyond what the kids were drinking. They looked at the fluoride levels in the urine, which tells you essentially how much fluoride each kid was taking in. It's directly related. How much fluoride you excrete is going to be related to how much fluoride you actually received. And they were able to show that as the fluoride in the urine levels went up, the IQs went down. And their actual statement was as follows: an increase in the urine fluoride concentration of 1 milligram per liter is associated with a decrease of half an IQ point. Now this isn't big. We're not saying that kids are going to become mentally defective or anything like that. But you are shifting, or lowering, if we are to trust these things, to shifting the IQ of the whole population by a small amount. 24 studies now. No attempt has been made to reproduce these studies in any fluoridating country except for one small study in New Zealand. None at all. And that also applies to a lot of other health effects, whether we're talking about arthritis, hypothyroidism, sensitivity to fluoride, bone fractures in children, accumulation of the pineal gland. They're simply not attempting to reproduce these studies in our countries. I've already said this. This is what parent in their right mind would put their children's teeth above their brains? What government would support a program aimed at lowering tooth decay by at most 0.6 of one tooth surface if it lowered the IQ of the population by even a small amount? Key health studies have not been done in most fluoridating countries. I've just pulled out this business about sensitivity. No country that fluoridate has attempted to take these anecdotal reports and put it on a scientific level, which I don't think is very responsible. And if you don't look, you don't find. The The absence of studies does not mean the absence of harm. And you will hear quite frequently promoters say, oh, we've been doing this for 60 years, and we don't see any evidence that people are being damaged by fluoride. But they haven't done the studies. So how can you say? And there's a very extraordinary and funny example of this. I was in Dryden, Ontario in April, I think it was actually April 2008, and Dr. Peter Cooney, who's the Chief Dental Officer of Canada, told an audience in Dryden, I walked down your high street today and I didn't see anyone growing horns, and you have been fluoridated for 40 years. So I have visions of Health Canada having a whole horn department. They were the specialists in bull horn, cow horn, deer horn, moose horn. They comb Canada looking for horns, and if they don't find any horn, then clearly fluoridation is safe and effective. Okay, so in short, I think the science is very much on our side that fluoridation should be stopped. A lot of that science is documented on our webpage, thanks to my wonderful son, who's just about to complete his law degree, but he made this website, particularly the health database. On that website, you will find a statement signed now by 3,600 professionals, doctors, dentists, scientists, many professionals. And the object of this exercise is to show people that the people opposed to fluoridation are not a bunch of wackos. We have a lot of professionals, people that can read the scientific literature, who are saying don't do it. Also, on the web page, you will find this videotape, which you can order if you want it, but you can watch it online for free. It's 28 minutes. There's 15 scientists here explaining why fluoridation should end. 3 of them were amongst the 12 that wrote this report. 2 of them were scientists who worked with the EPA. One is a Swedish scientist who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2000 and led the successful campaign against fluoridation in Sweden in the 1970s. Also Sir Ian Chalmers, who's very well known in England for his establishing what evidence constitutes good medical evidence. Sir Ian Chalmers and myself and a couple of dentists who previously were pro-fluoridation. And it's interesting. I know of quite a number of cases where fairly influential promoters of fluoridation have changed their position and come out against fluoridation. I know of nobody that has been prominent in the anti-fluoridation campaign that's gone in the opposite direction. It seems to go only one way, and it usually happens when people read the literature. And our big problem here is that vast numbers of academics, scientists, dentists and doctors are simply not reading the literature, but are accepting authority at face value. Statements from professional bodies, endorsements. This is not science, but they're busy people, so they don't have time to do it. And finally, we have the book, and hopefully some of you will read it. And if you I mean, I'm not here to make money, let's make it clear. I don't think we're going to make any money on this. But I am anxious that people read this. I said to my wife, I said, this feels like I've been constipated for 14 years and now they've let me, well, I won't get any further with that. She says, well, don't say that. Don't say that. It's out there. We've done everything that I think you can expect. We've done our job as scientists. We've outlined our case in detail. We've made all our arguments transparent. We've got 80 pages of documentation. Everything is referenced. And now we need the US and Canadian health authorities to do their job, which is to respond to everything in this book. Respond scientifically, respond in kind to this. I would anticipate that within a year, we should have a book which is called The Case for Fluoride. And then I see some students in the audience, and then when you go to your classes, whatever they are, you'd get 2 books, The Case for Fluoride, The Case Against Fluoride, and then you can weigh the arguments and weigh the science. Instead of what the current situation is, there is no debate. This was settled years ago. There is no debate. Shut up, Connett, shut up. admit that fluoridation was a huge, and if you can't refute it, then admit it's a mistake and let's stop it. The nice thing about this issue, I don't think that fluoridation is the most important health threat today. I think certainly obesity is far greater than fluoridation, but they may be connected. But it's the easiest one to end. Simply turn off the tap. So if you have the political will, then to end it, you turn off. But to get that political will, we need people informed and people organized. Now there's an interim step. There's an interim step which hopefully may not shatter the mental stability of your officials in Hamilton. Last time I came down, I think we upset them, but never mind. It's well established that the first year of life is the worst year for exposure to fluoride as far as developing dental fluorosis is concerned. That's established by Levy in the Iowa study, which is government funded. And this prompted the American Dental Association in 2006, the advice to parents and caregivers should consider using, if you're making up baby formula, use water that's not fluoridated. Don't use fluoridated tap water, use bottled water. That was the advice. Now the trouble is, they didn't give this advice to parents. They gave it to each other, to dentists, but not to parents. And so what we are asking communities to do is to get the water departments on their water bills to put this short notice. Parents, maybe you have to say your water is fluoridated. Parents should not use tap water to make up baby formula. And at least, that will reduce the number of cases of dental fluorosis, which are unnecessary, and at best, it could be reducing other things as well. So this is an interim step. And I have to tell you, we tried to introduce this in the New Hampshire legislature, this requirement that water departments throughout New Hampshire that have fluoridated water put this warning on the bills. The American Dental Association jumped all over this, and that bill didn't get anywhere. And you have to wonder why. I mean, this is their advice. All we're trying to do is to get it to parents. And I must say, there's so much irrational behavior from governments, government health agencies, and professional bodies on this issue that the only rational explanation that I've come up with, which actually begs the real question, but I'll say it anyway, the only rational explanation for so much irrational activity is it's now become more important to protect this program than it has to protect our people, to protect the health of our babies and so on. For some reason, and that's the question we're begging, for some reason it's more important for this program to continue than to do basic things like this. And I won't get into why that may be the case, although we left to the very end of our book an analysis of possible motivations of why people still continue to push this. But it's very unsatisfactory. I mean, we raise more questions than answers there. So that's a little longer than I expected, so I'm sorry about that. But we certainly have time for questions now. Yes?
My name is John Gustafson. I just want to thank you for coming here, and I stand in solidarity with you till the end with this subject. And thank everyone else for coming here and thinking outside the box, because this is huge. First question is, how do we break the hubris of the intellectual elite who absolutely refute any type of peer-reviewed journals or scientific evidence by yourself and other colleagues? And B, why not form a class action lawsuit against the municipalities who force these things into our water? And seeing your son, you said your son's a lawyer, is there any feasibility to this, to at least attempt to bring more public light, shed more light on this to the public, that hey, people are serious about this forceful drugging of the water, and is it possible? Thanks.
You've got my weakest suit. I mean, for me, law is like organic chemistry to many other people. I just don't have a handle on what works in law, what will work in
Do you know
law.
of any cases?
But there are all kinds of activities going on trying to find the way to grapple with this. You've got to remember that we're going to be up against a huge amount of money. The American Dental Association raises $100 million a year. They have 20 full-time lobbyists in Washington, D.C. You've got the bottomless pit of the coffers of the U.S. Health Service here, the Department of Health and Human Services. So it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy to win any kind of lawsuit. As far as class action lawsuits are concerned, the way it usually works, and I think you know, Erin Brockovich and others, is that you need a large number of people who are prepared to say that they've been damaged, so that the settlement is big enough to warrant the lawyers going up front. I mean, it doesn't cost the victims anything. The lawyers bank on winning, and then they're going to take a quarter or a third of the settlement themselves. And it's worth then, and that's what they did with tobacco. For the law firms to get involved in that tobacco suit, they had to put up $1 million up front, the law firms. And the trouble here is the one thing that they can't deny, which is dental fluorosis, would be a small settlement. But maybe if you had 30 teeth affected, it would be $1,000 a tooth. That's $30,000. And for the lawyers, the class action lawyers, that's not big enough. They would, you know, you'd have to have so many parents willing to go to court and go through this process. So, you know, 10,000 times $30,000 is quite a lot of money, but you have to have a lot. So that's difficult. I would love to see this go up to the Supreme Court on the constitutional grounds. It would be lovely to see that. And there have been 3 settlements, 3 lawsuits that were won in favor of fluoride for us, that it was a risk, a health risk, but each was chucked out on jurisdictional grounds. That the judge who made the decision didn't have the jurisdiction to make that decision. So it's awfully tough. But the first question, so the second one, I'm not good at answering that question. Well, but the first part was
breaking the hubris of the elite, because that's really what it is.
I tell you, and Sam has not heard this story, and probably should. I remember walking across campus at St. Lawrence University, bumping into the Spanish professor, and you know how they say hi, and how are you, and you say fine, and you walk in, and their day has not been rippled. And I said, actually, Steve, I'm feeling bloody awful. Why? What's wrong? I said, well, I don't want to teach chemistry anymore. What? What, you don't want to teach chemistry anymore? He said, why? I said, well, you know, I said, you know, chemistry and science is about truth and argument and objectivity and looking at the facts and all these kind of things. And I just feel I'm putting these students through a sham exercise, because when they leave this university, they're going to have their government tear this stuff up in front of their eyes. They're going to go out believing that science is about that, but then they're going to see that when it suits the purpose of government, that science is going to be torn up. And I said, I can't do much about it. I can't do much about it. I just don't feel that I want to be part of this sham. I don't want to, you know. So that's how I feel about it. I feel that much of my life has been wasted pursuing this notion that somehow our society is a rationally based society that responds to rational arguments, that professors at university are there balancing up the sides of the controversy, that are willing to entertain controversy. No, I don't find that at all. I find them running in the opposite direction if it's controversial. And people scared to speak out if it's not their absolute speciality. It's depressing. I find it very, very depressing.
This just made me lose so much respect for these quote-unquote higher institutions of learning. It's more like propaganda. Rockefeller himself said he wants a nation of workers, not thinkers.
I don't know. I'm disappointed, and I'm waiting. I'm waiting. Right now, I think that basically the people that are reading this book are people who are already converted, that are already against fluoridation, and it's useful. It's useful because now they're better armed, they're better equipped to handle this argument. If they ever get a venue where people are genuinely entertaining hearing from both sides. Right now, what's happening in Canada in particular is very interesting. In Canada, because Calgary has just voted 10-3 to stop fluoridation after 20 years, the council voted to take it out, and Waterloo before then, in a referendum, voted to stop fluoridation after 40 years. There's a lot of discussion going on amongst Canadian communities of whether to stop fluoridation. And most of British Columbia, most of Quebec is not fluoridated now. But what happens is the council brings it up, and then they say, well, we better get expert advice on this. And they go to the dentist. They go to the Canadian Dental Association or the Ontario Dental Association. And it's a total self-fulfilling prophecy. And then they go to the health department. And basically you've got a chain of command in these health departments where they're just essentially cogs in the wheel. You don't challenge, this is another thing I've heard, you don't challenge bureaucracy in the center. At the top of a bureaucracy is a political appointment, and there are a lot of people in these, and again, this is depressing, there's a lot of people in the public health empire, which essentially, once policy has been determined, their job is not to question policy, but to promote the policy, to promote it. And these guys are just like clockwork toys. I can show you, I can give you statements from health officers in Nova Scotia, Sydney, Nova Scotia, Hamilton, Ontario, Oakville, Ontario, the one I was just at, London, Ontario, where these guys just come out and they just repeat the mantra, and just deny everything in this book, just deny it. Sorry, yeah.
My name is Summer, and I'm a La Leche League leader, and
yes.
so I work a lot with breastfeeding mothers
okay.
and infants. And I'm wondering, for a woman that drinks fluoridated water, how much of that transfers to her breastfeeding?
Not much, not much. It doesn't, they're in this book. Actually, you might look. If you go to page 40, I think it is, you'll find a table. And I think the level that they cite for breast milk in a non-fluoridated community is 0.004 parts per million. And the level in the fluoridated community is about 0.01. So it goes up by about twice. But nowhere near the level that we're putting in the water.
Right. So the mother's body filters.
Yeah, that's right. That's what Ekstrand thinks. I spoke to Ekstrand. He's the guy in Sweden that did all these measurements, and he thinks there is some kind of mechanism which is excluding fluoride from the breast.
And I was also wondering, I know that sometimes people are encouraged, if they're not sure of the safety of their water, to boil water before making baby formula.
It doesn't do any good.
I was wondering if it concentrates.
Yeah, it does. For chlorine, it works.
Right.
The chlorine, you boil off the chlorine because it's a gas. But for fluoride, no. When you boil the water, it just makes the fluoride more concentrated.
Okay. And how about water filtration?
The cheap ones do not remove it. The Brita filters, the charcoal filters do not remove it.
Berkey's, right?
But you have to pay quite a bit of money. And
do you know if activated carbon?
No, that's the Brita. No, they won't. Carbon will not. Carbon will remove the organics and the chlorine, but not the fluoride. You need reverse osmosis or distillation, or you buy distilled water. But if you use distilled water, make sure you have the nutrients, add them back. But it's very difficult to protect yourself, because I remember when we were fighting this in Canton, it took us 7.5 years to get it out of Canton, but we did, with the help of the university. In that 7.5 years, my wife and I would get bottled water from the big, these 5-gallon things from a big superstore. And we used that for drinking and cooking. But we still were showering in this stuff, bathing in this stuff. And my wife is a keen organic gardener. She's watering the vegetables with this stuff. So we're not happy. And then when we go to work, every cup of tea, every cup of coffee that you have at work is fluoridated. When you go to a friend's house, it's all fluoridated. When you go to the restaurant. So it's awfully difficult to protect yourself. And that's why we are encouraging as many people as possible to get it out of the water. At least start the process. Yes, yes.
For the people who are proponents of keeping water fluoridated, do they stand to gain anything from that, or is it just...
Yeah, they think there's a lot of pride involved. I think that there are true believers. They really believe this stuff, okay? They buttress a lot of it with anecdotal reports, like I can tell the difference between the children who live in Hamilton and the children out in the boonies that don't have fluoridated water. I can tell from their teeth immediately. But what they're confusing here is that probably the kids out in the boonies are low-income children, whereas the people in the town are probably higher income, so unless you control for that. You've got to remember that the respectability of dentistry, especially in terms of public health, came on the back of the fluoridation program. So fluoridation, the trials began in 1945. These are public health dentists who are working on this for the Public Health Service. In 1948, they built the National Institute of Dental Research. And at this point, sort of dentistry suddenly came of age. And now the National Institute of Dental Research is raising money for research on the same par as money for medical things. So this has been the gravy train for research money, for dentistry, but it's respectability. They're proud of this. The average dentist out there is proud of this practice. They really think they're doing something good. I think there's two things. One is liabilities. I think they're concerned about liabilities. I think the ADA, I think the toothpaste manufacturers are really scared that something more than dental fluorosis is going to be proved finally in a court as caused by fluoride. And then they're going to have big lawsuits. That's what they're worried about. The ADA has their seal of approval on every fluoridated dental product. And of course, the people that are actually manufacturing. So I think they have concerns. But I think, and this is difficult, this is that last chapter I was telling you about. I think the real problem here is credibility. And put it this way, lose fluoridation, I'm now talking for the US government, lose fluoridation, lose credibility. Lose credibility, lose other public health programs, or threaten other public health programs. So for them, it's not an easy thing to contemplate losing credibility. I think that explains most of them. I think the real problem for us, the dentists are not the enemy, I don't think. The doctors are not the enemy. The enemy here is that they're so busy treating their patients, they don't have time to do what I did, or my co-authors did. We're all retired, and we could spend hours just reading up on the literature on this one issue. They don't have that luxury of time, so they take the word of their professional bodies as gospel. As far as money is concerned, obviously got the phosphate fertilizer industry, which is getting rid of its hazardous waste. They would have to pay a fortune to have it treated as hazardous waste, but if you buy a hazardous waste from industry, you buy a hazardous waste, it becomes a product. It's no longer protected by hazardous waste regulations. So the moment the public utilities buy this material, it's a product. So they can't dump it into the sea by international law, but they're allowed to put it in our drinking water. It's extraordinary, but true. Dentists don't believe this, but it's true. It's absolutely true. So they're making money, but not enough money. I mean, maybe $200 million a year. Phosphate fertilizer industry. That's not enough money to be wagging this dog. That tail is not big enough to wag this tail. You've got to find bigger moneyed interests. And the one that we discuss is sugar. In 1949, 1 year before the US Public Health Service mysteriously endorsed fluoridation because not a single trial had been completed. And there was practically no health studies being published. Practically none. They endorsed fluoridation, 1950. Incredibly important date in the history of fluoridation. 1 year before that, the US sugar lobby, 130 sugar interests from cornflakes to candy, said we need to find a way to reduce tooth decay without reducing sugar consumption. And they then put a lot of money into financing nutrition departments at Harvard, I think Michigan and Rochester. A lot of money, I mean millions. And we had professors, the chairman of the nutrition department at Harvard is a gentleman called Dr. Fred Stair. And he went around the country and testified in Congress that things like Coca-Cola was a nutritious drink. This is a nutritionist now from Harvard saying it's a nutritious drink. And that fluoride was the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, he just waxed lyrical about that. He had a very vicious tongue, and he would attack opponents of fluoridation like you wouldn't believe. And that was sugar money. So, but no one has ever joined the dots there and said, okay, so the sugar lobby said that in 1949. Did they influence the US government to endorse fluoridation? No. Whether that money is still operating today, whether they still have their interests, I don't know.
Does anyone ever ask the difference between sodium fluoride and calcium fluoride, especially in dentists?
It's not as simple as you would think. I mean, if you ask a chemist, we've got Sam in the audience here. If you ask a chemist, once a solid fluoride, like calcium fluoride or sodium fluoride, goes into solution, the ions separate. And they forget where they come from. They don't have little brains. They don't know where they come from. The ions are separated. So there's no reason to believe that a fluoride ion from sodium fluoride is any different from a fluoride ion from, say, potassium fluoride. And now when you come to calcium fluoride, there is a complex formed between calcium and fluoride, a single calcium ion and a single fluoride ion. There's a complex. And whether or not that changes the picture. But what we also know, it's a complicated story, is that when fluoride occurs naturally, it usually is in hard water. There's usually a lot of calcium. The calcium may be 50, 100 times the one, whatever the concentration of fluoride is. There's a lot more calcium in the water from other rocks. And calcium is thought to be protective against the absorption of fluoride when it goes to the stomach. So that's part of the reason that people say, well, natural fluoride is okay, it's this nasty chemical fluoride that's bad. And that's again complicated because the chemicals that we use for 91% of the fluoride, fluoridation, 91% is hexafluorosilicic acid, and from the phosphate fertilizer industry. And that is not naturally occurring. That is a man-made product, and that has never been subjected to toxicological testing. But I also wanted, people out there are saying things like, this isn't natural fluoride. Natural fluoride is okay. Natural fluoride is not okay. Natural fluoride ruined the lives of millions of people in India and China. To say at least 2 countries, maybe more. So there's nothing safe. Just because something occurs naturally does not make it safe. Arsenic naturally occurs in some places, doesn't make it safe. So that word natural is complicated. And as far as natural is concerned, I think the best natural notion is the level in mother's milk. I think that's giving us an idea of what nature thought about this business. Any more questions? By the way, I'm so glad there's some students here. This is great. Are you from Colgate? Excellent, thank you. Which department? Environmental. And you too, environmental? Great, thanks for coming. That's great.
Do you think that if people knew that the hexafluorosilicic acid comes from a chemical scrubber that makes chemical fertilizers, that would affect the public?
It's an emotional, it's certainly an emotional issue. I mean, people don't like the notion of hazardous waste being dumped into their water supply. And it's a classic example of the answer to pollution is dilution, because let me give you the whole process so you understand exactly what's happening here. They dig up phosphate rock in Florida. This is insoluble in water, so it's no good for fertilizer. You've got to have it soluble. So the process is you heat the phosphate rock up with sulfuric acid, and that drives off two very toxic gases, hydrogen fluoride and silicon tetrafluoride. And for about 100 years, these toxic gases destroyed the vegetation, crippled cattle, and so on. And after 100 years, slow learners, we said, okay, you have to put a scrubber on there. And this scrubber consists of a spray of water. And that water converts the silicon tetrafluoride and the hydrogen fluoride into hexafluorosilicic acid. And when that's built up to a 23% solution, I think it's recirculated until the solution builds up to that concentration. And then that's shipped off to the public waterworks, who then dilute it 180,000 to 1. 180,000 to 1. And for most toxicologists, by the time you look at whatever the arsenic level, because there are a lot of contaminants, there's arsenic, there's lead, there's chromium, there's mercury, and even radioactive isotopes, because the same rock that's mined for phosphate in Florida is also mined for uranium. So there are trace amounts of radioactive isotopes. But for the average toxicologist, when they see those initial concentrations divided by 180,000 to 1, they say, all that junk's not going to hurt you.
Yeah, but for the average person to hear
Yeah.
that story, wouldn't that kind of gross the regular person out? And
It does.
They wouldn't listen to the talk.
And the average dentist does not believe you when you tell them. And in fact, one of the most important people that was one of the co-authors here was Dr. Hardy Lineback. And he was one of the leading dental researchers in Canada. He was the spokesman for the Canadian Dental Association on fluoride. And it was when he found out that the chemicals being used were hazardous waste that changed him. It changed his position, yeah. So he's a brilliant guy too, and very, very important for us. And what you could say on this, the levels are low by the time you've diluted them, but arsenic can be present in the final mix at 1 part per billion, around 1 part per billion. It can be that high. It can be as high as 1.6 parts per billion. Because it's a known human carcinogen, that could increase the cancer risk by 1 in 1,000 if it was all the time. But it's not all the time. 1.6 parts, or 1 part per million. What I can tell you is, and this is legal now, the legal aspect, the MCLG for arsenic is 0. Now, two things. MCLG is the maximum contaminant level goal. It's what the EPA determines as the ideal safe level with an appropriate margin of safety to protect everyone, MCLG. And it's set at 0 because it's a known human carcinogen. And for the EPA, there's no safe level for a human carcinogen. So the MCLG is 0. But the MCL, the maximum contaminant level, which is a federally enforceable standard, is a compromise. Because it costs a huge amount of money to get anywhere close to 0. So you have to strike a balance between the ideal, which in this case is 0, and the level at which you can economically, for Western states that have natural levels of arsenic, how they're going to get it down. And so the compromise is 0.01, 10 parts per billion is the MCL. Now, the argument goes like this. Okay, we can understand why there's a compromise as far as taking the arsenic out is concerned. But once you've established that the MCLG is 0, you shouldn't knowingly put it in. You shouldn't be adding arsenic, any amount of arsenic, if your MCLG is 0. Now, whether that will stand up in court, I don't know. You got to go? Now, if people want to sign the book, they don't want to keep you here forever. What are we doing? Organizers, do you want me to start signing books?
Absolutely.
If people want to get them. But don't forget, you can also order them for the library.
Cool.
So, unless there are other questions, I shall just do my job here and start signing books. The thousands that you're going to buy for your nephews. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. I know there are a lot of things, I'm sure, demanding your time. So, this is one of them.